It's a sort of light-colored, light gray, quite opaque. It could be grape. It could even be some very, very nasty things with a very nasty color. The color would never be something that would prevent me from drinking something unhealthy, for instance. Something that had gone off and had a very odd color to it. It's definitely orange juice. So it has to be the orange color, the orange juice color.
We tend to take things for granted. We take the visual world for granted. We think we are given color and depth and motion. It's difficult to focus on these things unless they can be isolated. Sometimes an accident of nature will isolate them, as in a person who is totally colorblind. Last winter, I went to Norway on the first leg of a journey that was to take me to a remote coral atoll in the Pacific. I had come to meet Knut Nordby, who was born totally colorblind. He was to be my companion for the onward journey. Our goal would be to understand color and color vision, how it works, and what it means. You have something which I don't have, as I have something which you don't have.
Indeed.
And, and we're different beings in this way, and I'm very curious about your world. I wish I could enter your world for a time, although I think I then like to come back to my own.
Yeah.
And what about you? Are you curious about my world?
Indeed, indeed, I am. This thing called color, what is it? What is the quality that makes a red thing so different from a green thing, or a yellow or blue thing?
Here's the myriad dimensions of a very rich human life, but there is a particular strand running through it. And the strand here, of course, is Knut's congenital colorblindness, his achromatopia. To what extent does this inform his life? To what extent is it informed by his life? To what extent does it matter? What particular adaptations may there be? Many of us are partially colorblind and find problems distinguishing reds and greens. But Knut sees no color at all. This is because his eyes completely lack cones, the special cells required for color vision. Cones are also needed to discern fine detail, and Knut therefore has poor visual acuity as well. He must rely instead on the other visual receptors we all have, the rods, which are enormously sensitive to light and designed for night vision. Thus Knut sees especially well in the dark, but he is virtually blinded by bright light. My plan was to extract Knut from the dark north and take him with me on a 10,000-mile journey to the island of the colorblind. Pingelab is a tiny island 6 degrees north of the equator and hundreds of miles from the nearest landfall. I had heard that it was home to the largest community of colorblind people on the planet. We were about to enter a world where color blindness is so common that the experience of color cannot be taken for granted. What would it be like, we wondered, to grow up in such a world where one's parents, one's teachers, one's friends might also be colorblind? most of the island's children came out to meet us. Straight away, I noticed that some of them were blinking strangely, just like Knut. Besides Knut, I had invited along my old friend Bob Wasserman, an ophthalmologist, to help us explore the situation.
To explain it to you, that's when I had to use the word color. This tablecloth with nice flowers on, it's a very dark tablecloth to my eyes. I would guess it was red. And then we have all the nice colors of the food, which of course only translate into levels of gray for me. I think this is a sort of greenish thing, but that's probably because I know what it is. Bananas usually are yellow. If the internals of a banana is yellow too, I wouldn't know, but I guess it was yellowish. Bread, of course, is a sort of whitish. The fish could probably have some red in it. And this, it's hard to say. Dark green, maybe. But I'm just guessing. When we had our flights here, I had some very fine views of cloudscapes, of the coral reefs. To me, they were very beautiful, very interesting. I was told that there were some very special colors there, which were even special to people with color vision. Some azures, I think it was.
When I saw these reefs, sort of words like cerulean and turquoise and burnished metallic colors came to my mind. I sort of wondered if I should keep them to myself. I wondered if it was sort of cruel.
For me, blue is the color that people say the sky has. I know that blue also can mean being sort of sad. I'm myself an acrobat, and I've had this fantastic opportunity of joining this group to meet acrobats in a very different place, in a very different setting from where I come from, and hopefully through my own experience to be able to give them some ideas of how to live with this condition.
On our first morning, we went down to the dispensary. We had sent out word inviting the colorblind to meet us. We had brought with us a range of tests and spent some time assessing what they could and could not see.
They're very large numbers in a round circle. And just tell me whatever number you see. And if you don't see a number, just say there are no numbers there. Okay? All right, we'll start off with this one here.
Well,
very good. And similarly in this one. Okay, and how about this one here?
For instance, it was soon clear that Entis could distinguish differences in tone, but not in color.
Okay.
Or this one? The thing to do is to point to where the internal one is exactly the same as the surround. This one. Mm-hmm. Fine.
Here is wool of different colors. I want you to make a pile and put the dark on one side and the light on another side.
He says that the color is red.
You think this is red? Well, it's a dark color, yes? Dark? Okay. Is there any difference between these?
Jamen, aku kepasangkan nama Rialme. Same.
Okay. The black one was called red because he is used to red looking like this. All of our subjects sort of tend to look down and they squint a little bit and they're bothered by bright light. And I think especially with a brilliant day like this, if they had darker glasses, it would make life easier. They wouldn't have to squint so much. Okay. We had brought specially designed dark glasses as the single most effective thing we could do for the colorblind. I think glasses like this could be a great help, and certainly an option whenever it's brilliantly light like this. If it can become sort of acceptable and attractive, the thing to do, it'll become a trademark of Pingelap. You know, you won't be part of the inset unless you have these. The type of color blindness Knut shares with the Pingelapese is an inherited condition. It occurs in the general population perhaps only once in every 40,000 births. But here on Pingelap, 1 in 12 of the population is totally colorblind. What has allowed this normally weak gene to run riot through the Pingelapese population? Certainly one cause has been the isolation of the community, cut off from frequent contact with other people. Another has been their religion. We learned that in the 1870s, the island had been converted to Congregationalism, a Christian sect which discourages marriage outside its own small community. But natural disaster has also played its part. These Pacific islands are occasionally devastated by violent typhoons. This happened in Pingelap in 1775, and the population was reduced to about 20, one of whom probably carried the achromatopsia gene. The population then started to regenerate, but with intermarriage and inbreeding, the colorblind gene spread. 2 generations after the typhoon, there was a first appearance of achromatopsia, and it went from there. Today, achromatopsia is so common in Pingelap that it is not regarded as special. We saw this when we went to meet Intis Edward, whom we had tested at the dispensary.
He is an acromat, and he has 6 children who are all acromats. His wife is probably, since she's not an acromat, she must be a carrier of this gene, and that's the reason for the high incidence in this family. It will afflict nearly all the children in practice. None will go free. If they had children who are not acromats, they will still be carriers.
You see?
Knut always carries a monocular to help his poor visual acuity.
Or just turn it until you can see his hand.
Entis had never used such an aid.
I know that seeing small detail at a distance is hard for him as it is for me. I feel kinship, as you suggested. It's as meeting someone who I'm on terms with, visually speaking. I know that
Okay.
Ah, good. You got a good picture. Yes?
A trichromat, a color normal person, would necessarily see this as an affliction, something to be deleted. But here, where the family is close and where they function well, and where there are other achromatopic people on the island, this is part of identity, and one has to be very careful about saying it's a problem or nuisance. Some things are clearly a problem, like the dislike of bright light, but that's dealt with. Now, one mustn't romanticize here. There is certainly an abnormality if you want, but also I think one needs to define normality in terms of adaptation and role. And I wonder, therefore, if, despite the achromatopia, whether he's just happy to have healthy children and the achromatopia be damned. The Pingelapese have their own explanatory myths for the origin of the eye disease, of pregnant women walking on dazzling beaches, of gods and kings and invaders from overseas. I sought out Jacob Robert in his darkened storeroom at the local school. He, too, is colorblind.
According to a legend, the king of Pingelap had a son, and the son found a young lady. And they went to the king asking for marriage, and they were rejected by the king. At that time, the son of the king fell down and died. The spirit of the son got married to that young lady. After that, the young lady got pregnant, and the first son had this eye disease. That's the legend.
Jacob's own theory is rather different. He believes that the color blindness was brought from outside.
Maybe because of the coming of the white man, there might be someone married to a Pingelapese lady and started this disease.
And of course, there's a considerable coincidence between the first appearance of white men in any numbers on Pingelap in 1810, 1820, and the appearance of the Pingelap eye disease 2 generations after the typhoon. So it's an awkward sort of coincidence, and one obviously which superstition could easily latch onto. And besides, the white man has a rather bad record. He brought syphilis, he brought measles, he brought tuberculosis, he brought smallpox. Why shouldn't he bring achromatopia? Jacob even suggested that the eye disease might have come from Finland.
The doctors told me that there is a place in Finland that people have this disease. I believe that there might be someone from there.
For a moment, I wondered whether the condition had found its way into Knut's genes via the Finns. Knut grew up in Norway as one of 3 colorblind siblings. His condition was defined as a disability, and he was put in the school for the blind.
There I was treated as a blind person. I had to learn to read Braille. They had a regime that everyone there should sort of conform to being blind. And someone with residual vision, as I had, was sort of a pain in the neck because I did all the wrong things there. Like, for instance, reading Braille with my eyes, which was certainly not allowed because it raised off past shadows, and these shadows were much more easy to read by eye than by touch. So they put a big velvet mask over my eyes to force me to use my fingers. I ran away as some sort of protest. Running away from the Institute for the Blind was probably a way for me to be recognized as a normal, as an ordinary person, and not something special.
Knut's childhood experience made him particularly sensitive to the situation of colorblind children on Pingelap.
Seeing her with her eyes all the way down to the letters, exactly the way I did, trying to read when I was in school. I feel with her in a way. I mean, it's the handicap you must try to cope with, and I think she's doing well. I mean, she's trying.
Mimi. Thank
you.
you.
If you take this and look, I have the same eye disease as she has, and I carry this in my pocket. But it's very small, so she should have a larger one. I taught myself properly to read using a magnifier like this. When I started school, the other children could see something that I could not see. They called it color. They referred to things by names which had no meaning for me. I would probably not admit to this and tried to use these names, and sometimes I made very, very strange mistakes. Color.
Knut has long since taught himself the names of colors and makes sure he knows the colors of everyday objects. But there are still situations that confuse him.
I couldn't distinguish these at all. The center here is slightly, of course, darker.
Right.
But these parts completely blends with the green leaves of the tree. Yeah.
It seems likely that color vision originated in this kind of context. One theory suggests that flowers evolved color to attract the insects that would pollinate them, whilst at the same time insects acquired color vision to guide them to the flowers. Later that day, I tested Knut on my socks, but he was wise to them by now. You like my socks?
Oh, my God, yeah. Two very dark bands around down there, which This is a very dark band. Here it's sort of mid-gray, a dark, nearly black band, mid-gray, a black band, and very light the toe part.
Hello. Yeah, they may not be kosher, but I adore them. I would like to play with them, but the last time I did that, I was charged by the infuriated mother.
Well, judging from how I usually see the very dark bands, I would say they were red. If they could be blue, they could be green, they could be gray, actually. I wouldn't know.
With Dalton, who described red-green color blindness in himself in the 1780s, socks like this became a problem because he was a Quaker, and he went to the meeting house with what he thought was a sober black hose, but in fact it was vermilion, and he was rebuked for his levity. John Dalton was the great chemist whom one more associates with Dalton's theory in atomic numbers, but he also gave almost the first, and certainly the first detailed formal description of red-green color blindness. Knut, who is an encyclopedia of arcane information, tells me that Dalton surmised that this might be due to some coloration of his own, of the media in his eye.
He willed his eye so that after his death they should take his eye out and quickly look through his eyes or through the lens of his eyes to see if it in fact was colored.
Dalton's eyes still exist. I tracked them down later at the Royal Institution in London. I would have thought they were sort of shiitake mushroom, but in fact these are the remnants of Dalton's eye. They've survived really very well since 1844.
His own idea was that there was within his eye a blue filter in the vitreous humor of his eye, which screened out the long wavelengths, the red part of the spectrum. The post-mortem was carried out the day after Dalton died, and they looked at scarlet and green objects through it and saw that the color wasn't distorted. So the hypothesis of there being a blue filter inside the eye failed. In 1982, the technique which allows DNA to be amplified from very tiny samples was introduced, and my colleagues have been able to recover DNA from one of these eyes, and this leads to a great surprise. Everyone would have expected that what was missing from Dalton's DNA was the gene that codes for the red sensitive pigment in the eye. What was actually missing was the middle wave gene, the gene that codes for the green sensitive pigment of the eye. And there is a moral to this finding. We shouldn't put color names on the actual cells in the eye that we use for color vision.
This brings out then this business of the fact that we don't merely see with our eyes, but we see with our brains. Colors as such don't exist in the external world. There are only different wavelengths of light. And there is no simple translation of wavelength into color. How wavelength becomes color has fascinated generations of scientists, including the maker of the first color photograph, the 19th century physicist James Clerk Maxwell. Here we are doing a reproduction of Maxwell's famous experiment here in 1861 when he photographed a colored bow on black and white film through filters of red, blue and green, and then projected the images through the same filters and superimposed them and produced the first color photograph. Here, instead of a bow, we're using 3 T-shirts, the red, green and blue T-shirts which I wore on Pingelab. We took 3 black and white photographs of me through red, green and violet filters. Positives were made from these photographs, and this morning these are being projected through filters of the same color. And when we register these precisely, if it works, and I think it will, we will suddenly get recreation of the full color of the scene. Maxwell was interested by Thomas Young's 3-color theory. There were 3 tuned receptors in the retina, and that these would decompose the light, and that it could be reconstituted somehow in the brain. Maxwell showed that one could at least make a photographic or optical synthesis of a scene using these 3 primary colors. Whether or not this is a sufficient analogy to what happens in the human eye and nervous system was open to question. Since then, the search to understand color vision has moved deeper and deeper within the brain. One question that has puzzled scientists has been whether there is a specific region of the brain dedicated to color vision. Here, as we lift up the cerebellum, we see the association cortex, which has the areas necessary for seeing color, seeing movement, seeing depth, recognizing form, and generally making sense of the visual world. It is here, in the small areas, sometimes called V4, that color experience begins to take shape. One of the most exciting things for me was seeing the sudden appearance of color. Suddenly, that was so exciting. It was almost like an orgasm. And it's similar in my mind to the sudden appearance of depth with a stereoscope, or the sudden appearance of motion with a film projector. And all of these things for me were like metaphors of mental acts, when suddenly you saw the complex procedure by which you got to a new order of being. If color experience is something that we individually construct in our brains, then how can we be certain that each of us sees the same color in the same way? In the Royal Institution's laboratory, I was reminded of an experience of color I once had that was so extraordinary that I've searched ever since to recover it. I've been tantalized by the idea that you might experience a color you had never seen.
Indigo.
I was a bit of a druggie 30 years ago, and when I was very stoned, I said to myself, I want to see indigo. And as if flung by a paintbrush, a trembling, pear-shaped blob of shining indigo appeared, and I leant towards it in a sort of ecstasy. It seemed to me the color of heaven, and then it vanished. When I found the bottle, I thought, this is it, Eureka. But it's a rather dull color, not like the radiant, mystical color which I saw when I was stoned. I got a great sense of loss, and I kept turning things over and looking for it. I spent really 2 years in a fretful way looking for this color. I did experience it once more when, undrugged, I was in a concert in the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, in the Egyptology galleries. And in the first part of the concert, where there was some Monteverdi Vespers, I was enraptured. I felt a river of music, 4 centuries long, sort of flowing into me. And in this elevated mood, I went out into the galleries, and there I saw some lapis lazuli snuff boxes, and some of them had indigo. And I thought, it's okay, it's really there in the outside world, this beatific color. In the second half of the concert, this sort of melting, magical feeling which had gone with the Monteverdi disappeared, and I felt a bit rather down, a bit bored. But I thought, it doesn't matter. I'll be able to go out afterwards and go back and see it. The indigo is still there. It's real. It's waiting for me. And I went out, and I came back to the case, and it wasn't there. It wasn't there. There were blues and violets and azures and purples, but there was no indigo at all. There was none of that extraordinary, miraculous, mystical quality. There was none of the transformation which had occurred before. And there was a tremendous sense of loss and sort of fear and a sort of perplexity as well. And I felt something very precious had vanished, and I wondered if I would ever see it again. And I never have. That a visual world and visual perception depends on the brain, I think was forced on me very early, because I had visual migraines, as my mother had and as other people have. And in a visual migraine, there can be all sorts of changes. Sometimes there's just a brilliant scintillating spot, a zigzag, which gets larger and larger, but sometimes you can lose part of the visual field, half the visual field. Sometimes contours can change, sometimes colors can change, get distorted, get attenuated, vanish altogether. I sometimes had this, even as a child. When 50 years later, Isaacson, the colorblind painter, told me of his total loss of color vision, obviously following brain damage and damage in the visual cortex, I was able to resonate to this, I think, the more so because I'd known such a thing, although rather briefly, in my own migraines. Isaacson, or Jonathan I, as I call him, was an abstract expressionist with a very vivid sense of color, who, following a car accident, suddenly lost all color perception. Knut has perfect neurological processing of the signals coming from his eye. He only has some of the signals, but what he does have, he processes perfectly and makes a world with. Now, with Jonathan I, on the other hand, although all the signals came from the eye, something went wrong in their cerebral processing, so that he couldn't construct color. I think also that he couldn't construct a full grayscale. A very important thing for him was coming to feel his disability as a sensibility. And this did occur with him with a natural scene about 3 months after his head injury, when one morning he was driving to work in a rather depressed state. And when something happened, the sun rose, and for him, he couldn't see reds. Reds were very dark and almost black. And this black, huge thing, he said, was like some enormous nuclear explosion, this apocalyptic sunrise. He wondered whether anyone in the history of the planet had ever seen a sunrise with such eyes or such vision before. And he went and did his first painting, his real first black and white painting. This, I think, is a haunting painting. I think it shows some of the turmoil he was in at the time. Everything is controlled in these rectangular boxes. He is sort of trying to hold a chaos, an unworld, in some sort of formal order. You know, he tried so hard to get color back. There was one point I would see him glare at an orange to imagine its color back, but it didn't work. This is all that happened. His brain couldn't construct color anymore. This weird, spooky fruit sort of is a wonderful souvenir of his state, I think. But of course, it's a completely different thing, never having seen color, because then you would simply from the start create a visual world on the basis of what you have. You wouldn't be pining or yearning for something which you once had, but have now lost. Here in this mute, discrete black and white landscape with the faint effigies of trees here, I think this must be, in some ways close to Knut's world. One thing I think you both have in common, this came up last night when you said you were so comfortable at night. You said, this is my time, and you yourself said, I'm just like Jonathan I.
Yes.
He became a night person.
Indeed, and liked to roam around in cities, walking the streets during the night.
Tonight, coming along the dark road, Bob and I followed Knut's white shirt. He could see. He was at home in the dark twilight and in the dusk and in the night. And I believe that there's something similar here on the island. The achromatopic people who find the brilliant daylight difficult are at home in the night fishing and in the twilight. And at this point, they become the able ones, and the rest of us become disabled.
Night time, night fishing. It's my time, really. It's perfect. The not too bright light can have my eyes completely open. I can see the breakers there at the reef. Now, of course, the movie lights will blind me slightly because you have to use them because your film is not sensitive enough.
Any planets or stars?
Oh yeah, there is this beautiful big star up there, which I think is Venus. What you should be able to see now is my fully extended pupils, and you will see none of the squinting you have seen in some of the other acromats here.
Unlike Knut, I couldn't make out what was going on at all. On Pingelap, I had come close to understanding something of the world of the colorblind. Terms like achromatopia, literally no color vision, emphasize what is missing, but the experience of a night fishing has shown me that these people are a valued part of the community.